So, beloveds, I am Reverend Rudra, your contract minister, and I am wearing my Cub baseball cap, my brand new splinter new Cub baseball cap. For those of you online wondering what's on my head today, Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses to the door of the Wittenberg Cathedral in 1517. And that began a long debate about questions about church organization and authority. And it spread, those questions spread like wildfire among the Protestant parts of Europe. The third wave of the Protestant Reformation is called the Radical Reformation. Those folks reject the authority of the institutional church organizations. For them, each congregation is self-governing, and they are in communion or in partnership with other like-minded self-governing congregations. They're not governed by church overlords like bishops or superintendents or something like that. And they also reject church alignment with the government. These are the first vestiges of the separation of church and state. So who are these radical reformers? You probably know who most of them are. The biggest group is, of course, the Anabaptists, who become the Mennonites, the Amish, the Hutterites, the Brethren, and also the modern-day Baptists. Other groups include the English dissenters, who become the Congregationalists. We've probably heard that name, as well as the Religious Society of Friends, also known as the Quakers. And there's one more group in this bunch of people, the Unitarians, us. Could you put up the slide, please? So I'm going to run through several Unitarian dates. The first Unitarian denominations formed in 1565, known as the Minor Reformed Church of Poland, Lithuania. The Transylvanian Unitarian denomination forms a few years later in 1568. And each of these two denominations bring a diversity of already existing Unitarian thinking congregations together into a partnership with each other. Together, we're stronger, sort of like the Meyer logo on the back of their t-shirts. The first Unitarian church in England is established at Essex Chapel in London in 1774. We've just taken a leap in history. The first Universalist church is formed in the same year, 1774, in Gloucester, Massachusetts. And the Universalists coalesce as a denomination in 1778. A decade later, in 1785, King's Chapel Anglican in Boston, Massachusetts, converts to Unitarianism, the first Unitarian church in, at that point, the United States. In 1818, First Church and Parish in Dedham, Massachusetts, calls a Unitarian minister, which leads to the split or schism between the Congregationalist Christians, which is now known as the UCC, and the Unitarians. This month, at the end of this month, we celebrate the 200th anniversary of the Unitarian denomination in the United States. The American Unitarian Association is established on May 26, 1825. This is a big historic celebration for Unitarians in the United States. Let's celebrate. Let's give them a round of applause. So what's the point about all those dates and all those lists and all those churches and denominations? There are actually two. There's two core founding principles of all of these Unitarian and Universalist congregations. The first one is congregational self-rule. All of these churches, all of these organizations create democratic governance within their congregations. While most of them live in societies that are ruled hierarchically by kings or princes or lords or noblemen, where the people have no say-so in what happens with the government. They have a new vision for church and society that is based on democracy with the consent and participation of the governed. So not to fall into the trap of exceptionalism, We Unitarian Universalists share these democratic principles with the Anabaptists and Amish and Mennonites and Baptists and Brethrens and Congregationalists and Quakers, and of course our only sibling denomination, the United Church of Christ, because we all come from the same tradition that believes in self-governance. So the second core founding principle for all of these groups, our predecessors in faith also reject the Trinity as an unbiblical teaching. So others started to disparage them. Oh, they're the anti-Trinitarians. You know, calling yourself anti-Trinitarian isn't exactly a really cool way to identify yourself. So in response, our ancestors, the Hungarians, were the first, named themselves the Unitarians, one-tarian, as opposed to Trinitarian. That's where the name comes from. That's who we are. That's the other founding principle of all of these groups. So, going through history, the Puritan pilgrims who landed in North America in 1620 are English dissenters or Congregationalists. And they codify how congregational self-rule is supposed to work in their congregations in a very famous document that's called the Cambridge Platform of 1648. And they call their self-governance congregational, and watch the word polity, as in politics, not as in policy, polity. So a church, a local church, is a visible political union. That's what a church is, a visible political union of the saints, that's what they call themselves, who enter into voluntary mutual consent on the basis of a church covenant. What did we just read this morning? Our church covenant. We come together to govern ourselves, to do the good work that we do based on this covenant of mutual agreement of how we will interact with each other and reach out into the world and interact in the greater world around us. This is the basis for congregational polity. The Unitarian Universalist Association affirms that the Cambridge Platform is still today the basis for how our congregations are run. The democratic principles of congregational self-governance from the Cambridge Platform are part of our living tradition today. So over the past month, our administration has mandated the falsification and fabrication of American history from the viewpoint of their right-wing ideology. So we need to avoid such errors and such rewriting of our own Unitarian history. Our forerunners in faith also used the Cambridge Platform, unfortunately, to create a New England theocracy. Their noble vision was to become the biblical shining city upon the hill based on Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. They had this vision of the perfect ideal society on earth. But they created their own state church, the Congregationalists. The state paid all church expenses, including the minister's salary. The town council and the church council were one and the same. It was democratic, but only baptized male adult church members could vote. If you were not a member of the Congregationalist church, but of another church, you couldn't vote. You were excluded for voting because you belonged to the wrong religious organization. Furthermore, they also waged war against their erstwhile allies, the Wampanoag Native Americans, who helped them establish the colony. They banished women like Anne Hutchinson, who felt called to preaching. They banished Roger Williams and other Baptists for their advocacy of religious freedom and separation of church and state. They persecuted and banished the Quakers also because of their heterodox religious beliefs. And the saddest is that they executed 19 people, 14 women and 5 men, by hanging for the sin of witchcraft. That's what happened in that theocracy. So the theocracy ended in Massachusetts only in 1780, after the establishment of the United States of America. Massachusetts adopted a state constitution that's based on a Republican form of government in that year, ending the Cambridge Platform as the rule of government in that part of the country. But Massachusetts still had a Congregationalist state church supported by taxes until 1830, a few years after the Unitarian Congregationalist schism. That's when the churches stopped receiving funds, or at least in Massachusetts, from the government to pay for their expenses. So here's my question to you, and I rewrote the sermon yesterday based on what happened in the United States this week. We had a failed theocracy in the American colonies and in the very early United States. Can we learn from our own history? We don't need another theocracy in our country. We have found much better ways of pluralistically incorporating people of many different faiths and cultures in our society. This American theocracy, this New England American theocracy, is an important piece of American history that we need to share with our family, with our friends, and with our neighbors. Because in Project 2025, the administration plans to institute a new state church in the United States. With our failed history of an American colonial theocracy, we, the Unitarian Universalists, we must become the prominent, loud, and clear voices in our United States of America that says, keep your theocracy out of our democracy. If you think I'm blowing soap bubbles and this is not an important issue in our country today, just this week, Musk compared himself to the Buddha. That sent shockwaves rumbling all across American Buddhism. Then Trump claimed he would make a great pope. It didn't end at that. I think it was on Thursday or Friday that the White House published an AI image of Trump as the Pope. I'm sure you've seen it in the news. Totally disrespectful. That sent shockwaves across the entire the international Catholic world. Is that not a great example of anti-Christian bias that the administration claims is trying to rot out in our country? Our UUA president, Reverend Dr. Sophia Betancourt, has posed this question to all Unitarian Universalists, and I quote, "How do we proceed as authoritarianism is on the rise both domestically and around the world? How do we respond to this wave of authoritarianism?" From the days of the Cambridge Platform, our congregational polity, the way that we run our congregations, continues to evolve. It's not a stagnant document. We now incorporate the voices and votes of women and other historically marginalized groups, like Black, Indigenous people of color, as well as lesbian, gay, bisexual, queer, and also transgender and intersex individuals. All are welcome in our congregations. All people, no matter where they come from, no matter what walks of life they come from, they are welcome in our congregations. The Unitarian Universalist theologian, the Reverend Dr. James Luther Adams, updates our understanding of the Cambridge Platform and congregational polity in the aftermath of World War II, Nazi fascism, and the Holocaust. He's widely considered the most influential Unitarian theologian of the 20th century. So in the 1920s and 1930s, Reverend Adams spends considerable time in Germany and sees the transformation, the negative transformations that are happening in society and religion at the time. In his later trips, he affiliates with the Confessing Church of Pastor Dietrich Bonhoeffer fame, the church that opposed the Nazi regime. It rejects, the Confessing Church rejects the Nazis' nationalized state church. The Nazis nationalized the church and took control of it in Nazi Germany. So at that time, Reverend Adams receives a question from a German colleague of his. And the question is, and this is from the 1930s, this is like from 90 years ago, if fascism should arise in the States, what in your past performance would constitute a pattern or framework of resistance? What would happen if fascism comes to the United States is the question. Is this an important question for us today still? So Reverend Adams is developing a modern understanding of congregational polity. And he sees that our congregations are voluntary associations. Voluntary associations. We choose to join our congregations. It is a choice of free will that we make. Our congregations are not involuntary associations. For example, birth families, local schools, municipalities, political states, or state churches. We don't have such involuntary associations in our religious movement. We choose freely to belong to our congregations. And our rule, according to Adams, is based on the Greek principle of demokratia, meaning rule by the people. And rule by the people naturally flows from a voluntary association that you choose to belong to. This is the essence of what congregational polity is all about. It's rule by the people. And he says, Reverend Adams says that our congregations serve two purposes. First is more the inward focused purpose. Our congregations attend to the psychological well-being of our members. That's what he writes. We seek to improve ourselves as human beings in our congregational communities. This is where we work things out. This is sort of like we're in the crucible, like Arthur Miller's crucible. We're in the crucible of faith, figuring out how to become better people and how to work with other people to become better people altogether. In our congregations, we try to create beloved community for everyone in our midst. And we would call this process, this aspect, spirituality or faith development. So there's an important question, an important corollary here. Why are we doing this? Is the purpose of our congregations to figure out what's the best form of government for people on earth? No. We do this because of the essential guiding principle of congregational polity is love. We gather together for love. We gather together by love. We gather together out of love. We gather together to kindle that love in ourselves. We gather together to share that love with other people around us because it is that love that sustains our lives and gives us meaning and purpose and support and sustenance. There's a whole bunch, and for the Universalist tradition, that's the essential teaching of the Universalist tradition. All are loved. You are loved. God is loved. That is what the Universalists taught from day one. The Puritans also had a covenant in the Cambridge Platform. And in that covenant, it says that we gather together truth and love, seeking to create peace and goodwill. Doesn't that sound like our goals for the beloved community? From like 1648 hearkening on today. The creative, redemptive, inspiring power of love guides, or is supposed to guide, everything that we do. So then Reverend Adams goes on to the second purpose of our congregations. The second purpose for our congregations is to collectively, together, as a group of people, as a committed, covenanted group of people, we seek to promote social, political, and economic change for the common good, for absolutely, positively everybody in the world around us. To share the love. We want to share the love. We have freely chosen, by joining this voluntary association, to engage in this work. We gather together to create beloved community for all people, as in demokratia. So, tomorrow's the Lord Buddha's birthday. Unitarian Universalist Buddhists would say, for all sentient beings. The Unitarian Universalist Green Sanctuary program would also include for our planet home and for all life on Earth. Again, our notion of democracy is an ever-expanding, ever-inclusive concept. Again, it's still a voluntary choice. We all choose to come here. We all choose to belong here. We all choose to continue our work here. That's all part of congregational polity. Reverend Adams writes that love is the power that holds the world together. Love is the power that holds the world together. And that when we are tearing it apart, love persuades us to come to ourselves and to start on new beginnings. So this morning, before service, several people came to me with various different pastoral concerns, and there's a lot of heaviness that is weighing on people's hearts and spirits, and I want to acknowledge that. Some of it is from health issues, but other of it comes from what's going on in our society today. So we seem to live in a country that seems to be intent on tearing itself apart. So now is the time. Now is the time to kindle that spiritual discipline of love, to rekindle that spiritual discipline of love more than ever, to resist all these forces of dehumanizing evil that are bombarding us day in and day out. And instead of giving into those forces, to constantly focus our goal on creating beloved community in wherever we can reach that beloved community, in that circle, in that in those circles, those rings of connection that we have with each other, to seek create beloved community out of our commitment to love. The purpose of our congregational polity, the purpose of joining our congregations, the purpose of being a Unitarian Universalist is love, and to act out on that love in the world. It is love that holds us together. It is love that is the center of all of our shared values. It is love that connects us together with other world religions who also profess love or chesed or metta or loving kindness in their various other ways. We are accountable to one another for doing the work of living our shared values through the spiritual discipline of love. Or as we say in our covenant, the first line, the foundation of our congregation is love.